Hi, Arthur Malashevsky here from Footwork Podiatric Laboratory, and welcome to yet another Facebook Live event from Footwork. Today we'll be talking about cycling orthotics, and looks like we've had a lot of interest, so thank you for everyone that's expressed interest and thank you for joining us. Cycling is a passion of ours, both from a recreational and a sporting point of view, and as a manufacturer of orthotics and a podiatrist, we found that there wasn't really a product on the market that would benefit purely for cycling. Cycling mechanics are vastly different to those of a runner or a walker, and what we found is that people were trying to fit in walking or running designed orthotics into a cycling shoe and weren't really getting the full benefit out of it. They were bulky, but like I mentioned also, the mechanics of a cycling foot, the cycling mechanics of a cyclist are different to that when walking or running. So over the last 2 or 3 years, we got involved with professional cycling teams and professional cyclists to be able to develop a product purely for targeted for the both professional and amateur cyclists. The reason why we got involved with it was one of the things we wanted to achieve was increased performance. So what we found that is an unstable foot type in a cycling shoe leads to loss of power, but also leads to a lot more movement of the knee and the leg and the hip as the foot collapses inside the shoe. So by stabilizing the foot inside the shoe, making a rigid lever to be able to transfer the power from the leg directly to the pedal, in theory, was what we were hoping to achieve. And over the last 2 years, we've had some great results with the product. So here now, the product is almost ready to launch. And the way it will be actually presented to the public is that it's be issued by podiatrists or prescribed by podiatrists, and those podiatrists will be offered a specific training or workshops run by us to train them and show them what we've come up with and how to prescribe those orthotics. So let's begin. With the cycling orthotic, basically it is manufactured out of lightweight carbon fibre. To make it lightweight inside the cycling shoe, as we know, cyclists want everything lighter and stronger. Some of the things we need to consider is fit into the shoe itself. So what we found is that with a lot of cycling shoes, they need to be quite narrow to fit inside the shoe. Quite often what we find when a scan of the foot is taken, the foot itself, the width of the foot itself is actually wider than the shoe. And because the foot is soft, you can squeeze it into the shoe, but with a rigid insole that's designed around that scan, we actually need to make it quite a lot narrower than the actual foot itself. So what we've come up with is a footwork concave wedge design, which allows the orthotic to be made much more narrower than the heel and not causing any heel pinching on the heel itself. So here's an example of a couple of pairs of devices. One is a running orthotic and the other one is a cycling orthotic prescribed for the same patient. So if we put them together, we can actually see how much narrower the cycling orthotic is as opposed to the running one, simply because of the necessary of it to be able to fit into a cycling shoe. Some of the considerations that we need to look at and some of the things that we found is where do we actually apply the forces or the pressure on the cycling orthotic. So over years, we've made the orthotic far more aggressive than we normally would have for runners. We found that what we try to do is stabilize the foot or make a rigid lever. And through dealing with different elite cyclists, we've worked out that people that benefit most from these devices are those with a fairly hypermobile foot. It is that kind of a foot that tends to collapse a lot more inside the shoe, thus losing power and also leading to internal rotation of the lower leg, knee, hip, etc. So over time, we've made the orthotic a lot more aggressive than what we began with. So to show you some images of our CAD design, so if you can follow me closely, what you can see here is the shape of the orthotic when it's pushed up against a foot. As you can see in this region here, the orthotic is really cut into the foot. Now, move one more. This is a design of the same patient's foot as it would be for a normal walking orthotic for that patient. So as you can see, you've got pressure on the heel, but with the cycling orthotic, there is far more pressure. The orthotic's really being pushed into the foot itself, and that's where we generate the control. The other place that we need to generate the control for the orthotic is actually on the lateral column of the foot, to be able to stabilize the lateral side, allow plantar flexion of the first ray, and as podiatrists like to term it, generate the windlass effect. So one, you generate control around the cestum sacrum tali, but then secondly, but technology, don't you love it? But then secondly, we need to generate pressure on the lateral part of the foot in order to generate that rigid lever. So this is our aim. Now, we could develop an off-the-shelf cycling orthotic, which would fit a foot like that and could sell in shops. However, we couldn't really apply that pressure to each individual foot, and this is where the customization and specific to each patient or each client works really well with our software. We are able to push that pressure onto each individual design and shift it to wherever it is required, depending on the morphology of the foot. Some people might have a slightly bigger or smaller heel, which means we've got to shift that point to a different location for each individual that requires the product. Okay. Some of the other things that we've tried over time is things such as top covers. Again, going back to making the device as lightweight as possible, we actually use not sure if you can see it, we use a perforated Lunasoft top cover. The perforations take away some of the weight. And as a top cover itself, we use a basic cambrel top cover, which we find the foot slides nicely into the shoe and it lasts quite a long time as well. The devices are ultra light. They're stiffened even further so by the addition of a plantar fascial accommodation. Now, the plantar fascial accommodation doesn't serve the same purpose here as it does in walking. It is purely there to make the device stronger and stiffer by creating another curvature within the orthotic shell itself. In most patients, we also add a no plaster fill or an inbuilt med dome to separate the med heads and offload the first and the fifth a little bit more and allow plantar flexion of the first as well. In cycling, the control point on the forefoot, the force is applied to the forefoot, so you want to spread that weight as much as you can. And we found that we've had to adjust some with that no plaster fill 125, but most of the people that have been using these respond really well with that modification. As you can see, that device is quite archy, it's quite high, and for somebody to walk in it, they'd actually find it really, really uncomfortable. But because most of the pressure in the cycling shoe is in the forefoot, we need to apply so much more force in this region because there is no weight on it in order to be able to turn the foot. Who will be prescribing this? Well, these will be prescribed by podiatrists, and what some of the other questions that we get is how important is the actual bike setup for a patient requiring orthotics? Well, it is critical. You need to have everything else set up before you go and have your feet checked out on the cycling shoe. So you've got to make sure that your seat height is done properly, is the right height in the right position, your handlebar height, etc., your frame size. And in order to do that, we recommend you go and see somebody who is a professional at it. Now, there are some podiatrists who do that as well. We've been working closely in Melbourne with a company called Adaptive Human Performance with Ken Borhaus, and as well as in Adelaide with Elbows Akimbo with Anthony Mazzini. So thank you for those guys, and we're getting some great feedback from those guys who do a little bit of testing for us on the product and compare it to other brands on the market. And we've been getting some really, really good response. As far as questions, post some questions on Facebook and we'll be able to respond to those in the next day or so. And how do we go about doing our workshops? Well, for podiatrists, keep an eye out on our Facebook page and look out for our emails. And we'll be starting to run workshops on how to assess for cycling orthotics. There is a major one-day workshop that we will be running in August out of Hawthorn Football Club. And part of that workshop will be how to assess for cycling orthotics. So thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Any questions again, please let us know and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.